Martin. Hi. Benji. Hi, Benji.
Hey folks, how's it going?
Great. Just reached to you and reached out to you. I didn't know if you forgot.
I'm just adding myself to the agenda.
There's, by the way, last week, Chris joined the meeting, and there is something with the CLA not working out. But I mean, he's a Apollo employee, so this should actually be covered too.
Right. Yeah, there's often like configuration issues and stuff. Often there's a person within an organization who knows what to do to unpick that. I'm not sure who the person in Apollo would be. I'd normally reach out to Hugh.
Yeah, I mean, that would be my guess as well. Hugh has been around long enough to know these things.
Okay, so it's but it's not a foundation side, right? It's
No, it'll be Apollo's side, yeah. They just need to add him to the list of authorized, authorized parties or whatever.
Okay.
Okay. So we have 6 participants and there are 7 people on the agenda. So we'll just give a moment for whoever is missing to appear.
Hello, everyone.
I think we're still missing Jeff.
Yes.
Yeah. Here he is.
Yeah.
Hey, what's up, friends?
Hey. And you can see that on the continent, it's at the moment quite warm. In Netherlands also, right, Martin?
I mean, it's sort of sunny and rainy and gloomy. It's sort of it goes through the entire cycle almost daily.
Yeah.
I was basically showered when I arrived home. So we also go through the same cycle at the moment, where it's 28 degrees in the noon and then it's raining in the at 6, like, yeah, but it's like proper raining. Like I had to actually change the clothes afterwards. Everything was wet. Crazy.
Awesome.
All right. I think we're all here, so I'll kick us off. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the June edition of the Composite Schemas Primary Working Group. By being here, we have all agreed to the specification membership agreement, the participation guidelines, the contribution guide, and the code of conduct, links to all of which are in the agenda if you need a refresher. Let's start by introducing all the attendees. We'll do it in the order that we are in the agenda. So that starts with me. Hello, everyone. I'm Benji from Graphile.
Pascal.
I've since closed the agenda.
Sorry, I'm Pascal from Chili Cream.
I'm Martin from Apollo.
Jeff.
I'm Jeff from Apollo. Sorry, I was like opening it up.
I'm Derek from Apollo.
Coming from the guild.
I'm Michael from Chili Cream.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. So it would be great to have some volunteers for note-taking. The notes document already has the header and the beginning of bullet points, so just need someone to start add some notes in there. Sorry, I missed that. Did someone put their hand up?
Yeah, I'll take notes.
Perfect. Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate that. Okay. Let's review the agenda. So as usual, a summary of the secondary meetings that we've had every week last month, a review of any open action items, and then Pascal will be leading us through a review of Appendix A, specification of field selection scalar. Is there anything else that people feel need to be added to today's agenda?
Yeah, we can also have a look at the lookup proposals. I gave it another cycle over it, and there are, I think, 2 things open still, so we can have a look at that.
Okay. Yeah, fantastic. Sounds great. So we'll cycle back to the lookup proposal at the end of the meeting. Okay. I'm going to do this in a slightly different order. We're just going to open up the action items first. There are none. Hooray. Okay, that's that agenda item dealt with. So now I'll pass over to Michael, if you'd like to give us a summary of the previous, I guess, 4 weeks of meetings.
Yeah, so it's basically 2 things we are working at the moment on. That is the lookup require directives, and we did a couple of iterations there, like where we have the directives on the field instead of the arguments. I'm going through that later when I show a bit how it's looking now again. We also introduced a directive patch, which we are not 100% sure about yet. So it might be merged back into lookup. We'll see. So we did a lot of trials on these kinds of things. And one major work, which Pascal goes through in a minute, was also the selection syntax, how we basically map the data into inputs when we use require, lookup, or patch. And I think Pascal can give us more details on that. And that's it.
Awesome. Should I take over? Was that
yes, that was your cue.
a nudge that I should start going? Okay, I just compiled, which is good because now it looks a bit better. Let me. Oops. Do you see my screen?
We do.
Awesome. Cool. So we have talked about this last week quickly. This is the specification. I added an appendix to the specification at the moment, where we go into this field selection scalar. And the field selection is basically what we put in here with is or with lookup. And then it doesn't really matter what we use. We need this scalar anyway to specify. This specification now describes a bit the motivation behind the scalar, how it is used. It also describes the language. So what different language nodes there are what their use cases are. And it also now has a validation section where it goes into validation. Actually, I've seen that I probably have to change the last few validation rules here because I don't think they follow the schema. But anyway, the validation section is the newest part. I've added now all the, as this is a specification which basically combines output and input somehow. If you look at the rules, you see some similarities to rules that we also have in the graph call specification. It's basically everything which the output uses and the input uses, which are quite a few rules. These are more or less the same rules than we have it in the graph call specification, just adapted a bit. For example, here the required selected object field, it's a bit adapted, where we talk a bit different language because the value node is named differently and whatever. So that's up for review. I haven't really gave it a second read because I just finished it today and I need to clear my head first before I go over it again. And then I will open the pull request. Actually, I think the pull request is open, so feel free to comment on it. And this basically describes everything which this field selection is. Nice. Good. One thing which I want to highlight a bit, I realized this when I was going through the required select fields specification. One thing which I think is quite interesting is, or a bit adapted, is that you can actually have required fields that are not provided. For example, here, you see that, no, this is a contract sample here. So it could be that the output type is null and the input type is non-null, which would then just mean that you cannot use this lookup. But it's still valid to specify it this way. What obviously is invalid is when you have a required field, but you do not specify it, because that will never work because you have to, require it. It's a small twist. Other than that, just have it read. At the moment, the specification, the state, how it is very explicit. So you have to have the input object curly braces. You have to specify everything, to over-specify everything, which you could also just guess out of the context. It's on purpose very explicit because we can always loosen it up. So that's that. I know that we discussed it quite a few times, Martin, that in some cases we might not even need the selection set if it's obvious what we mean and stuff like this. At the moment, specification.
I think there was a misunderstanding there actually, because I wasn't talking about the selection set. I was talking about the field name.
Right.
Yeah.
So at the moment it is like this, so that you actually have to specify the field name, but that's something that we can quite easily fix, right? If we want to decide to go down this route. Yeah. Good. Then another thing which we have touched on a bit last time was the variable syntax for the fancy stuff, like the more fancy stuff, and nothing of this is in here. I think that it also doesn't make sense to put it in this iteration. We did a few experiments about what we have in stitching and stuff like this, just some ideas. I think we will just, once we sign off with this specification, we'll just do another pull request and then go into the other things which we talked about, which might not even be needed for the first version of the specification, but just that we have that somewhere written down. Yeah.
It was more about exploration, like this is about what you guys do with context. If you remember the discussion, it's more about making sure that this will hold up if we put things like that in here. I think like the experiments that we did during the last couple of days worked quite nice, because like a variable that you map to an input field fits quite well. But we have to explore a bit more the surrounding fields around that, where how you capture the context, what kind of context you capture, things like that.
Yeah, it's also it's probably quite a big topic, and I would rather have something signed off, which is a bit less, but we can still experiment around it, so that we can make some progress there, right? Because additions, let's make it close for changes, but open for addition. Exactly. Any questions so far? Very good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Thanks a lot for doing this. I think it just requires, I mean, we'll need some time to actually review it, and we can have discussions on the pull request, but it looks really great.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, so the action item is for everyone to basically review the PR, right? That's.
Yep, I would say so, yeah.
I particularly like that you've done it as an appendix. I was thinking with this number of validation rules, it'd be quite useful potentially if there's other situations where this would be useful to be able to break it out as its own specification that can then be used in multiple places. So having it as an appendix is a really good way of, I think, of implementing that. So yeah.
Yeah. Also, about the validation rules, it's literally at the adapted versions of, I think, path field selection or something like this is like one of the only really custom ones. Most of the stuff it's the same thing that we do in the graphical specification. It's just written a bit differently. So yeah, I've also pinged Benji a few times about stuff I didn't understand, and then
now I know what those questions were about.
Derek, did you have you had your hand up before?
Oh, I was just saying that for the action item is for folks to review it. That's about it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
There's also like just Benji, we do this for every scalar we have. Every scalar is basically an appendix to that because it could be reusable. For other things, we have to do the same thing with key because key has a bit different semantic to it. And until now, I think even in Apollo, there is not a 100% specification for it. And that's one thing that is on the list also to become an appendix to have like for each of these scalar that we define really kind of a sub-spec.
Yeah, and ultimately those then should be specified by those things.
Yeah, exactly.
Ideally, they would go into the scalars.graphql.org, which is kind of a bit empty right now. It's mostly, I think, just got datetime in it. So it'd be good to have some more stuff in there. But for now, I think keeping it keeping it as an appendix gives you the ability to keep iterating it until you're happy with it.
Yes. Okay, and that is really the part where we have made the furthest progress also. Jeff? You have a comment?
No, just editorial. Like I was
okay.
Yeah.
Today. Thank you.
Oh, there's another one. There's now also a local date.
Yeah, but it's both of them are from Andy.
Yeah.
Forcing to specify.
I've done something once, just for funsies. I took the two specification documents of the scalar, or actually just one. I'm not sure. Not sure if I've seen the local date one, and then put it into ChatGPT as a source, and then said, "Now generate me," and entered a few of the scalar names, and what came out was actually pretty good. So potentially we can specify a lot of the scalars just by letting it do its thing. It does that, generating nonsense.
Yeah. So this part of the spec has the furthest progress so far. We have like already definitive language, and I think that's also what we discussed the most. Like because it's so fundamental also for how we will progress with the directives. On the directive side, we at the moment are still discussing. It's more fluent, so it's not as specified as we are there. Especially we are discussing lookup. I think everybody's happy with the name, or lookup. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we discussed a lot, but I think we have settled on this part at least. I also rearranged the examples back to where we have lookup without any parameters, and then we have is as a directive on the arguments, and that's also what Pascal had in the appendix, right? What I am still working out, and that is, I think, the last thing, then we can put some more meat into the specification text, is this guy here, and I think we can solve it with some fantasy to it, and that is nested lookups. We discussed it last week, I think, and we're like hesitant on it. But I experimented with it a bit, and I think we can get that solved, and it would also allow any schema really become a subgraph to this specification, because like you could kind of annotate a schema, and then also things like nested lookups could work out nicely. Derek?
Yeah, I agree. It's a very nice and interesting feature, but I think we probably should cut down the scope and not try to solve this right now. I would start with like the simple use case of having a lookup as the top level queries, because that solves like immediate need. The other ones like a nested lookup, so yeah, like organization repository, those are nice, but I wouldn't try to solve them in the first go.
I think there are two different cases here, right? So one is sort of the namespacing case where you have a singleton object.
This guy here.
And yeah, and the other one is about like really sort of nested keys. I think it would be really nice to at least explore this to make sure that we know how to support it, and we can always sort of leave it out of requirements for a first version, but I do want to make sure we've thought about it and we have a way of solving it. So I'm really glad you've done the experiments and have gotten some positive results.
Yes, the main thing is where I'm a bit concerned at the moment about. It works out in this case because I can specify the key with the organization here.
Yeah,
and that's how I can specify the key, and that I could then use for resolving in the composition later that this is possible to get through the key. This needs a bit more experiments, but I think if we give it maybe 2 more weeks, we will have a solution for this in most cases. We can always drop it. So I'm not worried about dropping it if we say, okay, we cannot find a good solution. But I talked a lot to people now about that, and there is a lot of use cases for that. I mean, Benji brought it up. There was also like very hesitant when he brought this use case up, but there is a lot of people who are designing APIs in that like that, and I think that's an opportunity that we could take.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I think in the fields for the repository key, the first ID should be name, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Example is wrong, but yes, that would be name, and then we would have organization and would have this. I would like to solve it also in the case that you don't have a cycle essentially. But as I said, let's experiment 2 more weeks maybe on that. We could time box that. If we don't have a solution by then, we could say it's next iteration. The other thing is I also added patch that's also what we discussed last time. We still can come up with a better name. I don't remember what Benji had. I think maybe a good name back then.
I'm still hesitant about adding another
Yes, I know.
directive here because the semantics are very similar to lookup. It's a specialized case of lookup in my mind.
Yeah, but it's also very different because lookups, like the semantics are actually different, because when you have a lookup, then you can rely that this entity exists. Whereas if you get a patch, it could also be that you implement the resolver in a way that if you don't have an entry to that, you just return a null for the data, which is then patched in still, right? So basically your resolver is written in a way that you can pass any ID in and you get some data. For instance, let's say we have a reviews subgraph and you get now the product ID in. And if you don't have anything for this product ID, you return just an empty list of reviews. But that doesn't mean that this item actually exists. It could be that this item was never created.
Yeah.
And that's why I think the semantics are a bit different. A lookup is something that you can use from a front-end perspective also, where you want to basically implement a fetcher for an entity, whereas the patch is something that is not useful for for other use cases. It's basically very much what underscore entities was.
I think there's a discussion in the chat, but I haven't been able to read it yet. Or is this a separate?
I'm still talking about the previous topic.
Okay. Yeah.
But there's also partial lookup.
Yeah.
Why I didn't?
I think patch is especially confusing to me because it suggests modification.
Yes, you're right.
I think I might have suggested something like extend, maybe. But I think the difference is really, from what I understand, the difference is lookup checks that the thing exists and then gives you more details about it, whereas whatever this other thing is, patch, for example, just assumes that it exists and adds extra details to it. And those are fundamentally different, even though behaviorally they're very similar.
Yeah, and I'm not even sure the distinction is that clear cut in all cases.
The thing is, patch is not useful for anything outside of the composite schema spec.
Yeah.
Whereas I think lookup is useful for other use cases, specifically for something like Apollo client or relay or whatever.
Yeah. But I think that's why we discussed combining it with an internal directive to sort of
because the patch would be private, wouldn't be visible, right? Only lookups should be public, the other ones should be
yes. The thing why I dislike that is because like internal gives it suddenly a different semantic.
I'm still not convinced the semantics are really what makes a difference here. I think the difference is that you wouldn't want to expose this publicly. Like if you have a subgraph with a lookup method that that doesn't check whether that entity exists or doesn't give you sort of information that should be publicly accessible, then you can mark it internal. But I don't think the difference is necessarily in the existence check. Like a primary lookup, like it's not necessary for a primary lookup method to perform an existence check either. The output object just has to match up with the key fields.
Yeah, but this is the difference, right? When a lookup returns something, then this thing exists for this key. That is different where I have some additional data for this object, and but I don't know if this object really exists. That is a semantic difference here.
Yeah, but existence isn't as clear cut. like multiple subgraphs might have their own understanding of when an entity exists or not, or when additional information can be fetched for that entity.
Yeah, sorry, Cam. The main, like, I also have concerns around teachability, right? Like that you put internal on it, and it has this different semantics that we have to teach people. I mean, we have to decide on that.
I'm still not convinced on the other, like, that the semantics are that different. But I think that's a conversation we have to continue, and maybe with some more examples.
Yeah. Kame? No.
Gone.
No, sorry. Just yeah, situation. Yeah, what I wanted to say, like two things. One is the patch versus lookup. So for me, the entry point that we started with was to hide a specific field, right, from being like publicly used. And the purpose is not really to like just hide it, but like not use this as a starting point for the query, right? Because it's a root field, right?
Yeah.
So for me personally, I think that the lookup field should be like hidden by default, but like, you know, because it's like a contribution. And then when you want to actually have something that is like accessible from the root, you opt in, right? So for me, that would be the better like developer experience and like whatever. But about the patch, I guess like there's like I feel like there's like two things here. One is, yeah, I want to hide it from the public usage. And the other one is like ownership, right? Like you don't start with a patch, you start with the thing that is a lookup, right? So I feel like those could be even two separate things. Like you could have a lookup and a patch and also public and hidden, right? Like because then you have like, yeah, I would say that like then whenever you want to resolve like I don't know, an entity, a user repository, doesn't really matter. Then you would have a lookup and a patch, and you start with a lookup, and then you patch or like extend the original entity, right? Or you can have those fields hidden or publicly available. I think like those are two different things, I would say. And if you want to solve, like for me, the patch does not say that, yeah, I'm not uh, like I'm not available to the public usage. It just says that I will, you know, apply a patch to a specific object, right? So then if we want to like hide those patches, it might be confusing, right? And then if we have a patch, but we don't have a lookup, then yeah, we have a composition error, but you know, then you need to decide who actually owns this, and then there's like another issue. So I have some trouble with those approaches, I would say.
I think that is why I made it two directives for now, because like what you said is that you would prefer that lookups be private by default, and I think lookups should be public by default because they should be usable for client frameworks to inspect. And I know the patch should be internal by default. So that was my thinking, at least, behind that. Pascal?
Yeah, so we do have something like this already in Fusion, right? The entity resolvers and stuff like this. It's like the first thing you run into. It's literally you connect to schemas, and then you say, I want to add something to this type, but I have no idea that this type exists. For example, the simplest schema ever. You have a user graph, and you have a block graph, and a product graph, and the reviews graph. Well, you have no idea if the reviews graph doesn't know if a product exists. Otherwise, I would have to sync my 2 million product catalog to the review service. Now, if I have product by ID on the review service, which returns a product with a review in it, then I'm not allowed to call this this function to verify that the products exist. And it's semantically, even though they do similar things, for me, semantically, it's two completely different things, right? Because one has this semantic of existence, of ownership, etc., and the other one is more like, I want to contribute to the graph. So it's different, even though it's very similar.
Martin?
Yeah, I think the products and reviews example is interesting, because sort of the way I would think about it, and the way we sort of currently handle this in Federation, is that if any subgraph sort of returns data for an entity, that sort of signals existence, but that doesn't mean that the review service needs to know about all possible products. Like as long as the product catalog service is able to resolve a particular product ID. So there's not necessarily a like a very clear-cut difference. It's just that sort of any subgraph is able to contribute to an entity, and as long as sort of any subgraph returns data for that particular entity, it exists. And that also means that you can sort of run these things in parallel. It's like existence in distributed systems is often sort of more difficult than
Exactly.
I mean, it's not clear cut sort of whether the fact that data for a certain entity isn't part of a particular system means that it doesn't exist.
But actually, you have the sorry, but actually you have the distinction in Apollo Federation, right? If it's a root field and you come through the root field, that is essentially the existence check. And then you can contribute. I think that is a good word. You can like these underscore entity resolvers, they are contributors. They can only contribute additional data to what was fetched in the first place. But they are not, they don't do the existence. You cannot rely on their data that something exists. They can only say, okay, I, for reviews, can tell you that this entity has no reviews. But it doesn't tell you that this thing, you couldn't reuse them to resolve root level data. That is, I think.
But I think that I think that, you know, the point, I think Martin actually put it a very good way in sense that, like, when you have even like a REST endpoint, right? You have a REST endpoint and I do /products 123/reviews, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can put whatever for a 123 over there. That doesn't, and maybe you're gonna have reviews, maybe you don't. And in my opinion, the basic distinction is whether something is publicly accessible. This is the root level resolver for a query, versus something that is only accessible through the query planning. Those are the entities resolvers, right? But they're just basically still queries that can return you some additional data, but that's still just private versus public kind of thing, how you orchestrate those calls. But like, if I get no reviews for 123, does it actually means that 123 exists, or 123 doesn't have any reviews? I don't know. I just don't have any reviews, right?
I kind of, I mean, I know where you're coming from. I kind of agree. I think the only reason why it could make sense to have to not use internal for this is to not mix these two semantic differences, because in my example, there was a product by ID field on both graphs. So one graph had a product by ID field, which actually is the product catalog, and the other one had the product by ID field, which is just on the reviews. So now you could theoretically specify it on one side as a lookup and on the other side as a patch. But
yeah, it's what we like. The main concern I have, and it's like I'm not clinging to having two directives. We can go with internal if everybody thinks that's the better idea. But we really, like, can we explain that? Is that easy to teach to people? That is, I think, my main concern. Like if we split it, it's, I think, I don't know what is easier to explain. Like this is.
I think the first step is to get clarity on the semantics, like for us with some examples, because I feel we don't really have a good understanding of the different use cases here yet. I think Benji asked a good question about the review service returning like an empty list. And I mean, my first response would be, in that case, like, don't return an empty list when you don't have information for a particular entity. Return null. But that may not always be possible.
Yeah, because like in a distributed system, actually the components are responsible for their data. And you could design it that you have a reviews table, for instance, and you just have a key for product in there. And you could, on read, just check it. Maybe on write, you verify that with a cross microservice call. You really verify that this product exists. But if never someone wrote a review for that, this component doesn't even do that. And you don't want to have these cross calls to other microservices just to verify that you could fetch some data. This is often read optimized. And in this case, there's no way that you could say that this and it's also not the responsibility of this service to tell you that this product really exists. That is the responsibility of the product catalog.
I mean, in that example, it might be, but in many distributed systems, there may not be a single source of truth for that notion of existence.
And that's fine.
And exactly.
That's fine.
They could be, if you have, for instance, a price service for the product, then this ownership might be split. But this use case where you have just a list to something is a very often use case that you find. Like you're right. I mean, there are certain patterns that you have in these systems. And one of them is like the reviews example is a very often example that people struggled with when we introduced Fusion to them. So we at the moment have to do that with internal on the entity resolver. And it's difficult to teach. That's my concern.
Yeah, I mean, it's also it might be that there's another notion here hiding, and it sort of we either need like an argument to look up, or maybe another directive that isn't internal, something that more clearly signals what we're trying to convey here. But I think we need to get some clarity on it ourselves first.
But isn't the internal, that's what we're actually seeing, that is available in the supergraph schema, but it's not visible to the users? That's kind of implies the semantics there, right? So
yes.
So again, like the lookup that's internal, that's kind of, it's available to the supergraph. It's not available to the end users. That's kind of like, I don't know.
Yes, that's what we do. And like, that's exactly what we do.
It's really not nice. Because if you think it from a domain perspective, if you split the bound context of the whole application, a subgraph is a bound context, and the product is the entity which is spread across multiple bound contexts. Now, if you have a product by ID, it implies that you get the product from on a graph. You get the product entity, right, by ID. So the field that you should have in your graph, depending on your naming convention, is either product with an argument ID or is product by ID. And if you design your subgraphs properly, these two fields will collide. So you cannot make them internal. So you would have to change the name of a field to, I don't know, product by ID internal, just to have it be possible to combine it. You know, because you want to expose product by ID, but you only want to expose it from the product service. But the products exist also in the review service. It's also an entity that exists there. So the way to fetch the entity there would also be product by ID. But you cannot use this name, because if you have to flag it internal, then it would be gone from the whole schema.
But
You know what I
but you would only flag it internal in one subgraph, right?
Yeah, but it would be wouldn't that make it internal everywhere?
No.
No.
Okay.
Yeah,
No,
to
I
be
think we discussed
yeah.
that, like the difference between inaccessible and internal. Like inaccessible is a strong guarantee. Like if you mark it inaccessible in one subgraph, it's inaccessible everywhere. But internal
Yeah,
is
then we have
subgraph
to
specific.
we have to very.
But we
Okay,
also
thank you.
just to we were discussing that introducing inaccessible to the mix, but we also like then you have two semantics for making something internal. Like inaccessible makes essentially something internal, but across subgraphs, whereas then internal makes something internal for just one subgraph. Like this could also introduce like problems. Yeah, and Benji just says private internal. That I just like it could also make it complex to teach to people that one of the directives hides it just for one subgraph and one hides it system wide. And it's not like it's not about functionality, right? I think on functionality we in general agree. It's more about like it should be easy to use and it should be easy to explain. Maybe you can also talk to. I mean, you have a lot more documentation guys at Apollo, and try just to talk that through with them, and if they what they think could be a valuable input into the discussion. Like, I mean, there's nothing definitive about anything of that. It's just like that's my main concern. How do we teach people that in a very easy way and they understand that? Because like this was one of the biggest struggles our users had with Fusion when we introduced it, that this was not so transparent that internal makes it work in this case.
It's kind of a decision that you make when you write the resolver, right? You add lookup to it. You want to make this contribute to the supergraph, so you add lookup to it. Now,
no, I don't think that's what lookup by itself signals. Like,
but as the
but that's true of every other field that you add to your subgraph. Like it's public by default, right? And you have to explicitly hide it if you don't want it to be part of the supergraph. In my mind, all lookup signals is that if this resolver returns an object, its key fields will match up with the specified arguments. Like those are the semantics that lookup signals.
So if we like make a summary of the two approaches, this would mean that, or if we make a summary of what Patch actually does, is it would make the field internal, so that you do not have it on the supergraph if it's only defined in this one subgraph.
Yeah,
and you would never be able to use it with.
It is exactly what we do today. Like it is, and it works, right? You basically take this away as an entry point, and that means it because of this effect will only end up being a patch or a contributor to an object. So it's only a contributor to an object. I think I like how Martin put it.
I think Benji, or well,
yeah,
I don't know. I think Benji was the one who introduced contributing here as a term, but I might have missed it.
Not that I remember.
But it is actually what it does, right? This guy only contributes data to an object, whereas this is an entry to an object. And there could be many entries to an object. If we, for instance, have a service that handles pricing, right? Maybe that is different from the product catalog descriptions. Maybe we have here a pricing service with daily price updates.
I don't really think the distinction between sort of origin and contributing is working here. And I mean, it's it reminds me of sort of the strong ownership semantics that we had in Federation 1, Apollo Federation 1. And the reason that didn't really work for people was that ownership in sort of more complex systems is often sort of spread out. It's not as clear cut. So you really want to avoid and sort of that's the reason in Federation 2 we've dropped the distinction between like extends and the main object definition. And the way you then look at these the contributions of different subgraphs is that sort of every subgraph is able to contribute fields to the same conceptual entity. So in a sense, they're all contributors. There's no single owner.
Kind of, right? Because only subgraphs that provide an entry level are owners. You still have an ownership principle. Like everything that is an entity resolver in Apollo Federation is a contributor versus every entry level by ID field is really a lookup.
That's not the way I've thought about it before, at least. I don't know if other people are thinking in those terms, but I've never thought about the distinction between root fields and underscore entities field in that way. To me, the reason we have a normal root field is to make an entity accessible to clients.
But doing that, making the entity accessible to a client effectively becomes a root. Not necessarily at the root of the query, to be clear, but it makes a root. Whether it be you loading it from inside an organization object or whatever, it is then a root. That thus says that this thing exists implicitly. And then any of the other things that are internal that can extend it and add extra stuff, they now have this implied understanding that that thing already exists. So therefore adding an empty array to it to say, I've got no comments or I've got no arrays, no reviews for this, that's totally fine because it's already like guaranteed to exist before it's reached the patch or the internal lookup or whatever it is that we want to call this.
Exactly. Like there is a semantical difference behind these things. I am
actually leaning towards the idea that an internal lookup is actually reasonable because I wasn't originally on board with this, just to be clear. But the public lookup has to imply the object exists or not. It has to get the object in order for other things to extend it. And so that does imply it's a source of truth effectively. There can be many for the same object across different services, whatever, but it is a source of truth. And then any other internal lookups can add stuff to it, as can lookups that aren't internal. They can also add stuff to it as well. And that's all fine, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I can maybe give an example where this again, it's one of the examples that we have with the fusion stuff as we first ran into this problem, because we have this problem from like day one. As soon as we let people play with it, they were like, how do we do this? And then I think we even had it before we had internal. Like we ran into this problem. And the thing was, what do you do when you have two product by ID resolvers and you fetch a product by ID? Well, you call one of the subgraphs. And now one of the subgraphs doesn't have all the products. They would return null. So there is this concept. The question is it worth, I would say, having a custom directive or not having a custom directive. But the concept is there. And 90% of the things that you will write is patch. Like most of the stuff is patch. Because it's rarely that a service, you often add something, but you rarely have the knowledge about if a thing actually exists.
But one of the things that you mentioned, so like having the two product queries by ID, right, and one returns the value, one does not. To me, sounds like if it's actually a public one, not the internal lookup one, that is actually like one of the fundamental properties is that always the entities point to the same data. So I would imagine the catalog for the price subgraph and catalog subgraph, they point to the same entity. So they should return the same data.
That's not possible. That's not possible in a distributed system.
Yeah,
that's impossible.
They own the data they have, and
but
but this is then actually fundamentally broken because, well, depending on which order you plan your query, if they're actually equivalent to each other, you're going to have two different results. And one of the fundamental thing that we want to have is that it's always, gets you the correct results. So that would imply you have to go to one versus the other.
One way of sort of phrasing this is what happens if you only request the price for a product or only the reviews for a product. Do you expect that to sort of check existence or not?
Yes, I mean what this is doing here, right, is if you ask for the reviews, only the reviews, it would still choose this guy or this guy to make the existence check. And because you expose this on both subgraphs as public, if you will, could, by the way, also be a thing. Also, I think a lookup should always be public by default, would verify the identity and then go here and fetch the additional data that you could contribute to this object.
Yeah. So the fact that the lookup in the catalog is, or in the price subgraph is also public, means that they do have to sort of agree on existence, because otherwise you do get a ambiguous result.
Yes.
And obviously we can't, this is sort of at the same level as shared fields in current Apollo Federation. Like we ask that if you mark a field as shareable, if it's sort of defined in multiple subgraphs, it shouldn't matter which subgraph we pick to get that field from. But it's up to you to ensure that that's the case within sort of the limitations of what you can offer and what you're okay with. Like it can very well be that they're not always fully in sync, that there's some kind of lag or something, and that's up to you to sort of know whether that's acceptable. If you opt into the shareable behavior, you sort of know what you're getting into. And I think in this case, if you mark if you use a public lookup, we'd have similar guarantees, or we'd ask for some similar guarantees.
Exactly. I think Pascal only talked from in a distributed system. You have things like eventual consistency and things like that. Yeah. Technically, yes, it's 100% true. Like by making both of them public, you're stating that both of them can do an existency check.
Yeah. I mean, just for the record, I understood that, or the example I brought with the product by ID. The idea was one is the internal /patch /contribute /whatever directive we have there. So one is the entities resolver in Apollo, and the other one is the public field. They just happen to have the same name. You have to make this distinction for the reasons we just discussed. Otherwise, you run into the issue that you do an existence check by accident on a data source, which doesn't know if the data exists, right?
Yeah, that was the reviews versus the catalog thing. That's
Yep.
totally.
Yeah,
So
I
my-
think so.
My remaining concern about this is
Okay.
that is it going to put people into like the pit of success? And if it's like lookup is the public thing and then lookup internal is the private thing, and we think that actually lookup internal is going to be the more common use case, then I'm worried that people are going to not do that. But that said, the cost of not doing it isn't particularly huge, particularly if they're doing this where they have the exact same field, product ID gives product. Then once they discover that this issue exists, all they need to do is tag a little internal on that one subgraph and the problem goes away. The field wouldn't disappear because it's provided by multiple other graphs anyway. So though I'm a little bit concerned about pit of success, I think the actual repercussions of it going wrong are very easy to address.
Yeah, the main thing why I'm fighting for it to be public is really this is a super indicator for client frameworks. And if we want to expand lookup beyond the specification, then it must be public. Like this is for us.
One thing that so the clients wouldn't actually ever see the lookup, right? The super graph wouldn't have that. It would just product by ID, right?
Well,
Depends.
I mean, ideally, we would expose lookup in the API
Exactly.
schema.
Because it would be really nice for the clients.
Yeah.
Yes, because the clients could
It's like nodes.
It would generalize the concept of node.
Don't worry, Derek, not in V1.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
but
mean, and to be clear, like actually the first use case for us for what's now lookup, what we used to call Finder, was exactly the client use case. Like that actually the proposal for Finder predates Federation. It's a pretty old idea. And like
yeah.
they're the way clients sort of handle their cache configuration and the way they are sometimes forced to execute a query to check for existence, even though they could just go to their local cache. I mean, that would all be solved by these annotations.
Yeah, it's a funny thing when we started talking about this specification, and we showed Martin about how Fusion works, and he said, "Okay, I have here also a specification called the Finder specification." It just folded so nicely, and I never looked from the client context on it, right? And I think this is a great way to generalize something like node without needing to use the node field. Cameron?
Yeah, I wanted to add that like I have like a big concern with doing the lookup and lookup internal, like patch doesn't really matter, with the existence check, because the only way to actually opt out of it is to like first of all mark all of those as internal, let's say, and then apply. And if you want to expose the product by ID, let's say, you would have to create another field that is not a lookup, right? So
Why?
yeah, so for example, if you have a product and a lookup, right, then it means with the existence check that you actually like the gateway actually makes the first initial request to the product to check the whatever it is, right? Or even if it's like indirect, like let's say you have, I don't know, reviews and then you hit the product, right? So then the existence is also checked through the lookup, right? Not the internal lookup, but the public one, let's say. So it means that we force people, like force the gateway to actually always do the existence check. And that's kind of like, there are two issues with that I see. One is, yeah, it's hard to opt out because you would have to like do the lookup that is internal. And if you want to still expose some entry point to, fetch product by ID or something like that for the client for some whatever reasons, you would have to have a field that is not annotated with any directives. So it's not, the purpose is not for the lookup, just to serve the product. So that's one thing. So it's, I don't know, a bit I would say confusing, and the other one.
I'm not sure I get that point.
I also couldn't follow in it. So you have now, because this guy is a lookup, but it's internal, so it would not be used as an existence check, right? Why would you need another field?
So what I mean, I don't know if you can hear me because I had some.
Yes, I can.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I mean is that whenever you have a product by ID and you have a lookup, then it's a lookup. The gateway will always route there if it's direct or indirect, right? You can start with a reviews and then attach products, right? So then you do the call to check the existence.
Okay, I think there's a misunderstanding. So what is not happening is, like, let's say we have here a list of products, or we have a list of reviews. Maybe it's this, like, this service exposes reviews, right?
Yeah.
And review
like
has a reference on product, right?
Exactly. And then if you want to check the existence,
you wouldn't, like, because like if there is a product, if there is a review to a concrete product, like on in a distributed systems, on creating data, you have to verify that everything is correct, right? If you do an order, you would certify that this product actually exists that you order. So if you create a review, this microservice has to verify that this product exists. That means if we have a review, we know that the product exists to that review, and we would use whatever field that is a lookup to get the data.
And
so
it might even have additional denormalized data on it. That's sort of why we use provides. So it might, like, the review might actually store the product name, for instance, or the product description. So you don't have to go to the catalog at all.
Yes.
I'm not sure. I mean, the other thing that I wanted to raise is that if you have public lookups, like let's say 3 of those, right? And you remove one of them, then now all the services that have this lookup will get all the traffic from the gateway. So then
only entry traffic, right? Only route, like only if you have a query.
In this case, yeah. But I'm not sure.
Only this.
But I'm not sure if, like, whenever you have a product and then you contribute to a field, like, there is a review in a product, but there could be a case when you have, let's say, I don't know, user in comments, or like, I don't know, whatever. Basically, there is no correlation between one and another. One does not store a list of another. It's just that, like, you can have, I don't know, like reviews, right? And you fetch a product and then you go to the service that defines the reviews or something. I don't know. But I feel like, I don't know, maybe I'm not sure if that's true, that you don't have to do that you are like 100% sure that the products exist, to be honest.
At least it's not what we do today in Apollo Federation. Like we don't go through a root field. We just go through the underscore entities for the subgraph that provides additional data if needed at all, because it might be the case that in this case the reviews subgraph actually has the product data you ask for stored itself.
In the case where you have a provide, right?
I think the best
hope for the like, if we define that, if there's a lookup, then it has to hit it first, then I don't know, it might have some like potential implications, I would say, that like if it's within the spec, then then we cannot really opt out of it. You know what I'm saying? So not sure if that should always be the case.
I think the main thing that we're kind of operating under is the assumption that even though we know it's a distributed system and we know that this is a lie, we're operating under the assumption that the data is consistent. So if a review exists and it references a product ID, that product exists. And that if you were to delete that product, you would also delete those reviews. You get all of the issues with distribution and like consistent.
Yeah,
at the
eventual
end. I forget the word.
consistency.
Eventual
And
consistency. Thank you. So you get all those kind of issues. But we still sort of have to operate under this assumption, I think. So the main issue that we have discussed during this call is the issue of end user data being incorrect. So an end user saying, give me product ID 27, you cannot, just because a user's asked for ID 27 doesn't mean that that exists. So that's the thing that needs verifying. But once you've entered into your graph, we now assume that your graph is internally consistent. So we need to check that that entry node is valid. And then from there, we can just flow around. And if you manage to hit it in one of those windows where you've deleted the product, but the reviews haven't been deleted yet, then you might get inconsistent results. And there's not really much we can do about that. So I think that's
you would
the
get a
assumption.
similar
Sums it up.
result if you sort of had to fetch data from multiple REST endpoints and integrate it manually.
I mean, this spec doesn't solve all the patterns that there are for distributed systems like Targa patterns or whatever flows you use to make sure that your data is consistent. There always is a chance for inconsistency, but we are under the assumption once you entered something and you said this is an entry point, then from this point on we assume that the data is consistent.
And that is something that I think is very much worth pulling out as an explicit point near the beginning of the spec. Thank you, Michael. I need to call this meeting to a close because we're already 10 minutes over. But it's been a very interesting discussion. And as always, you've all made fantastic progress. Really great questions going on. Camille, if you think that there's still an issue here, please write up some details about it with some examples. And I think that would really help the discussion. And yeah, see you all either next month or in the meeting in 20 minutes time. Thanks, everyone.
See you.
Bye.